This message comes from NPR sponsor Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, changing lives everywhere. Their scientists played a substantial role in developing more than half the cancer drugs approved by the FDA. Danafarber.org/everywhere. Data from 2018 to 2022.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. When you think of the civil rights era, what comes to mind? Do you hear the sounds of bus boycotts and sit-ins? Maybe you think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. giving a speech.
They told us we wouldn't get here.
These are the images that history books and Hollywood have made the calling cards of an era. And that is a pretty accurate interpretation of the time. But missing in all that conflict and struggle is the mundane, the quotidian, the average, everyday life of Black Americans simply trying to live. And that's something director Ramel Ross hadn't seen. The story of Black people through our own eyes.
You know, Bell Hooks says that the only site for resistance against the slew of images made by other people of the Black community was the Black Family Archive.
That's Ramel Ross, director of the film Nickel Boys. It's based on the book The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, a book that's sometimes been called unadaptable because of its unique mix of perspective and metaphor. Now, the film adaptation is nominated for 2 Oscars, including Best Picture.
What happened to that one kid I used to hang with all the time?
You don't remember?
Remember what?
The film follows the lives of 2 Black boys, Elwood and Turner, who meet at Nickel Academy, an abusive reform school in Tallahassee, Florida. The entire film is shot in first person, which I will say takes some getting used to, but within the first few minutes of watching the movie, I felt immersed in a way that felt deeply personal.
The poetry that existed in life and the lyricism and the sheer beauty of whatever we want to call Black life during that time was unfortunately just not visualized. Like in terms of popular images, like what's missing is the ambiguous and the open-ended.
Maybe the most refreshing thing about the film is the way it depicts violence. As audience members, we're so used to seeing the horrors of that time period and brutality against Black people, but Nickel Boys takes a different approach.
When I've had pain happen to my body, I'm not looking at the wound itself. I'm looking at the person's feet who is coming to help. I'm staring at a cloud or a leaf. I'm trying to cope and get through the moment. And we took that approach in writing.
Today, Ramel Ross joins me.
Pleasure is all mine.
To get at the core of what makes Nickel Boys a profoundly new portrait of Black life in the Jim Crow South. We talk about the legacy of Black trauma films and how a different point of view, behind and on camera, made all the difference.
I'm just interested in Black subjectivity as it relates to the image. And when you consider the historic use of the camera and the Black community, us not making the images, those images that are made by people who are outside of our family, coming from a certain directional ideology that's tied to Enlightenment era thinking about inferiority of other races, you have to confront what is the consequences of all of the images of Black people that are spread across the world having not been made by our family members. Like, what if every photo that was ever taken by every person that's ever been disseminated was made by someone who had a deep, close relationship to them, right? If I asked you for a photograph of your mother, you're going to find a good one.
Yeah.
And then you're also going to talk about it. There's no way you're just going to let it float around.
It's not contextless.
Right? But our images have been not only decontextualized from our own versions of ourselves, but recontextualized in a nefarious view. And not always, of course, but for the most part.
Bearing in mind this thought that you just shared around context, subjectivity, perspective, framing when it comes to how Black people have been depicted through imagery since the camera, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, what does filming in first person add to a film about this era?
Yeah, I think it's as much that it is first person and that it's first person made by someone who deeply identifies with the character which they're giving first person, right? Like that entryway into the image allows for my subjectivity and the way in which I view us, the way in which Jomo views us.
Shout out Jomo Frey, fantastic cinematographer.
Yeah, Jomo's a G for sure.
Yeah.
But I think the way in which Jocelyn Barnes, who's a producer on the film and also a co-writer, she was born in North Africa, understands perception and the world to be ushered in as a starting point from Black subjectivity. And with that, you're graced with, especially in a conceptual way, you're graced with the open-endedness with which we actually view each other, or it's possible to view each other. Mm-hmm. Most people who are making movies are, like myself, are programmed and indoctrinated in the same visual language as everyone else.
It's entrenched.
Yeah.
But also, for those of us who are not filmmakers, who are simply film goers, and there's way more of us, we also understand that language, and it becomes cultural shorthand for all of us.
Yeah.
And it also kind of goes out of your control as a filmmaker once it hits the audience as well.
As a maker, I realized this from like photographing in the South for so long. It took me 3 years to make an image that was unique to me because I had to work through the images that I knew were good that had programmed the way in which I photographed. Like, our imaginations are curated. We think that we're free thinkers. We are, but you can only output what has been input, you know? And so you have to work at imagining, you know, you have to practice and flex aesthetics.
Right. And that makes sense then, shooting Nickel Boys in POV, showing these, not just Black people, but Black children who are in this extremely vulnerable position in this, you know, so-called reformatory school in the South in the 1960s. There's already so much in that setting that is working against these main characters. And when you consider the visual language that a lot of Hollywood or a lot of filmmakers rely upon when showing Black people in this way, it seems like this film is a really interesting intervention for that. Thinking about that, I also want to talk about the way that you and your crew chose to depict violence in this film. Because the film is shot in POV, we rarely see physical violence enacted on the characters. We instead see what they're seeing, you know, the floor, window pane, the backs of their classmates' heads. We'll hear the sound of a leather strap hitting someone's skin. We will hear like a droning, chilling fan just like whirring in the background. You managed to capture the insecurity and trauma of experiencing violence without showing it explicitly. Talk to me about why and how you chose this approach.
Yeah, it was an initial decision that Jocelyn took, which was to just consider, especially over the course of photographic history and also kind of early film history, the over-index of images of Black people in violence and the way in which sort of Black skin holds this history of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade and all of this suffering, so much so that like Black skin is content itself. You want to change the content of something, you can color in the person Black. It's something I used to do. I do for my art practice with Shel Silverstein poems. If you color in the person brown, it changes the context of the poem. The poem means something different. What is that? Black skin has a different history, right? Like we're drawing on a different thing. And considering all of this violence, we ask on Black bodies, quote unquote, do we need to see more? And then when you ask that question and you decide to not show it, you realize that there are just as many ways to not show it than to show it. But the reason why it's shown is because it's sort of easy empathy, and it's never really, we've never been required or asked to explore the other imagination space. But I think even more so, if you take point of view seriously, if you truly make the camera an organ, you ask, like, where is a person looking during these moments, right? Like when I've had pain happen to my body, I'm not looking at the wound itself, right? I glanced at it when it happened, but then I look away. I'm looking at the person's feet who is coming to help. I'm staring at a cloud or a leaf. I'm trying to cope and get through the moment. And we took that approach in writing. But I think to see someone go through those things is a type of voyeurism that's unique to cinema. There's a voyeurism to being a human being, but I think that's unique to the reproduction of reality.
That's such a good point. I guess you're trying to show the audience something, but I feel like you really pushed past that to get me into feeling like the character in a way that's much different.
Yeah, it's like people need to see it to believe it. Like, did it happen? I didn't see it happen. Did it really happen? It's like cinema shows it to you so that you get a sense for the fact of it. The photograph, when it first came into existence, was a document at first. It was about fact. It was about fidelity. It was the closest thing to reality reproduction possible. And with that, it became a way to document movements. It became a way to prove it was evidence of suffering. It was evidence of culture. And with that evidentiary underpinnings of the image, it moves into cinema. And then we show it so that the audience has a true feel for its fact.
Coming up, why do we see certain kinds of Black stories at the Oscars year after year?
I think it's more to do with the way or what white audiences elevate to awards, per se, because it seems like it's more that, 12 Years a Slave or this film gets there, and then why not another one?
Ramel Ross's take on Black trauma films and why the conversation is necessary.
This message comes from Charles Schwab. When it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices, like full-service wealth management and advice when you need it. You can also invest on your own and trade on Thinkorswim. Visit schwab.com to learn more. This message comes from NPR sponsor REI Co-op. You can't make more time, but when you opt outside, you can make the most of it. So make time for those early mornings, last-minute trips, and timeless views for small victories, big fails, and everything in between. And when you're ready, REI has the gear, clothing, classes, and advice to help you make the most of your time out there. Visit your local REI co-op or rei.com/opt-outside. This message comes from CarMax. Buying a car is a big decision, a decision you should feel absolutely confident about. And when you shop with CarMax, you will. Because CarMax offers a 10-day money-back guarantee, so you can feel confident that you made the right choice for you. If you're not completely satisfied with your decision, simply bring it back within 10 days for a full refund. Always shop with confidence at CarMax, the way car buying should be. See CarMax.com for details.
This message comes from Noom, using psychology and biology to build personal meal plans to fit your lifestyle, taking into account dietary restrictions, medical issues, and other personal needs with daily lessons that are personalized to you and your goals. Noom's flexible program focuses on progress instead of perfection to help you build new habits for a healthier lifestyle. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com.
I imagine you're aware of all the never-ending discourse about Black trauma films.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that most or even all theatrically released films about Black people are stories about racist violence. And by the numbers, this obviously isn't true. There's still plenty of Black movies telling happy or contemporary stories. I mean, as we talk right now, One of Them Days was #1 in box offices just recently.
Yeah.
But I do think that this assumption about Black trauma films being most of what Black filmmaking is based on something real about how damaging bad movies about racism or bad movies about our history can be. What do you think about this discussion? And was it something on your mind during the making of Nickel Boys?
That conversation is necessary, and I think it's such a good thing that, finally we're kind of in control to some degree, or we're part of the conversation of making those films, and we get to critique them publicly and people are engaged. I think it's more to do with the way or what white audiences elevate to awards, per se, because it seems like it's more that, 12 Years a Slave or this film gets there, and then why not another one? I don't know why that's the case. I think a lot has to do with who they're elevating to make these films with this money, and the way in which the types of audiences who are following those filmmakers and are connected to their aesthetics talk about the films. Like there's an auteur element to a Steve McQueen, but then you have like a Ryan Coogler, he made Fruitvale Station, but then he's going straight to Creed, and then he's going to Black Panthers, and now he's making a horror film. And you see Jordan Peele kind of starts in that territory with Get Out, and he stays in it, but has like a different twist. And so they're not sort of straightforward films that also have elements of, but see, those aren't like Black suffering films. So I think Nickel Boys is an interesting case because it's so formal. I think it's both one and not one at the same time, which I think is difficult for folks to categorize. Because I have a hard time connecting this film to almost any film because of its aesthetics and because of the way in which it does time and because of the way it uses the film as a body and film as a sculpture. It seems to be more arts-based language and aesthetics than even commercial cinema at all.
Yeah, I was really moved by how much visual beauty there was throughout the film. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of brutality, there's a lot of violence, but you see what a day looks like from the perspective of the main character, Elwood, and it makes you mourn with him for the community that he was snatched away from when he was sent to Nickel. And often in period pieces, something that sometimes it don't bother you, sometimes it does. You get a sense for what's happening out in the world, but you don't always get a sense of a character's daily life. I felt like I both understood the world that Elwood lived in, but I also understood his community. I also understood what he thought was fun and interesting and beautiful, what mattered to him on the individual level. And so much of it was him appreciating and noticing what was beautiful in his world. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, in a film with so much heaviness, how do you see the function of beauty?
Yeah, I love that question because the role of beauty in the film, one is exploring the banal, the mundane, the quotidian as a site for like a universal life and a site for, I like to call it the epic banal. It's where like meaning making connects to observation of small details, which is a sort of dilation of time in the moment where you're allowed to like really be present and see. It's almost quantum when something's like there and not there, right? Like it's a metaphor because I recognize it as a metaphor. It's a symbol because I recognize it as a symbol, but it's not because if I didn't recognize it, it would just be the thing. Like that type of beautiful human experience overlapping and emerging in consciousness is just it, I think.
Well, thank you so much for making such a heartbreaking and also beautiful film. And thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Brittany, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for your attention and your thoughtful questions.
That was Ramel Ross, director of Nickel Boys. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Alexis Williams.
This episode was edited by
Jasmine Romero.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Homes.com. Some might say Homes.com is the best home shopping site. Homes.com goes above and beyond to bring home shoppers the in-depth info they need to find the right home. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, one of the largest recipients of NIH funding. Dana-Farber scientists played a substantial role in developing more than half the cancer drugs approved by the FDA. They've made one advanced cancer discovery after another for over 75 years. Dana-Farber Cancer Institute is changing lives everywhere. More at danafarber.org/everywhere. Data from 2018 to 2022. This message comes from Warby Parker. If you wear glasses, you know how hard it is to find the perfect pair. But step into a Warby Parker store and you'll see it doesn't have to be. Find a Warby Parker store near you at warbyparker.com/retail.